right, so let's go ahead and walk through an example of how to use the costing worksheet to cost a show. The example from the book is this one here, where we have right you are if you think you are. The design for the show, it has a lot of really plain flat colors. This main wall is mostly gray with light gray trim, and this wall is gray with light gray trim and dark blue sides. This masking wall is dark blue, and these window units are light gray, all that same flat trim color. The floor, however, is a super complicated marble pattern, which will take a lot of layout and a lot of extra time. So this is how I would put that through this costing worksheet. So the first main page is where I might start and go ahead and enter anything that I want to enter into these blue boxes, starting with the name of the show. Once you fill in all that general information, you also want to fill in when you're going to have labor, or how much labor you've already accounted for, and for how many weeks. Be a big difference if overall your work schedule is 2 weeks versus 4 weeks, or 2 weeks versus 3 weeks. Ours are usually about 4 weeks worth of painting, although we don't often paint that entire time. That is how much labor I have available to possibly use versus how much I'll actually use, which will eventually come down here. Your show budget will be automatic. Once you enter it, might be calculated, is going to go through a couple different things before it's put down at the bottom, and that includes contingency and a 10% amount put toward tool use to repurchase brushes that are used and other materials that are not accounted for in every aspect. You can also change those contingency amounts by changing these percentages over here. If you think that your contingency should be higher because there's a lot of possibility for error in your calculations, or if you want more on your time contingency because you know that you'll be experimenting with new techniques or working with new scenic artists. So the next thing we'll do is our show colors, which I've already put in here. Primer, the dark gray, I've taken the breakdown of what colors are inside of that, which are in a drop-down menu here for you to select, and then adding in the percentages will get you your result. This is a back-end piece of paperwork, so again, we're only filling out the parts that are blue, and I always rename my colors in a show, so I like to have those over here to make sure that everything is congruent with the process sheets. And if I've already done some mixing or sampling, this is a great way to have those colors already laid out. All right, so here is the process worksheet part of the template. And this is the real meat and potatoes of the math that we're going to be looking at here. So a bunch of stuff is already filled out from when we filled out the main sheet. You have the title of the play and the name, and this one here you'll notice isn't blue. So the way you're supposed to rename these is down here in the tab, and you'll see that that's automatically going to update there. I'm going to also go ahead and rename it over here, and that will automatically update in your main page as well, so that that is all easy peasy lemon squeezy. This sheet has a lot of hidden columns that's doing math for you behind the scenes, and these default things are in here only because if there isn't anything there, you get a bunch of error messages when the formulas don't have anything to play with. So for that reason, and to keep it a little bit cleaner, we're going to go ahead and leave stuff in there regularly. This in general, we're just going to go through our layers of how we're going to paint something, and there are extra things for us to include in case we need them. And as I described before, since this is very much a lot of flat color and standing scenery and the floor, I've gone ahead and added up a lot of that square footage so that we can price that together. So first of all, I'm going to prime everything, and I am going to go ahead and prime the floor as well. I'm going to add that into this calculation because I don't really need to account for primer on every different unit. So I'm going to go ahead and prime it, and I'm going to put a description in here of exactly what this layer is, which is priming all the walls and the main floor. And I am going to be using the consistency of flat primer because it's a different consistency than some regular paint. And my calculations come out to 1,699 square feet. Now, can I round this to 700? Sure. Is it going to do any harm? No. But the more accurate we are in every step, because don't forget that we're putting a contingency into our estimate to begin with, it's good to know. The other thing is that this will give me an amount required in gallons. And that number can really help me to figure out how much physical paint I need. It's especially good for young artists who haven't mixed a lot and need at least some sort of a ballpark to figure out what that's going to be. So this is going to be rolled, but we're going to go ahead and account for it as an intern instead of a scenic artist. And so that's putting one in, and then we're just gonna put in all the rest. So you can relabel this part. It's not gonna change anything. So I am just to give myself a little bit more information. But I'm gonna fill out the color, which again is a drop-down menu from our color chart worksheet area. And then I'm gonna add a description for my own benefit, so to know what's going on here. And this is a line for rolling all of the dark gray walls, the bookshelves, and the curved. And I'm going to do a second coat. I know I'm going to need a second coat because I want it very smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the square footage calculation by doubling what's on my worksheet here for the square footage of this and the wall space here that I already know that I've already added up. So again, that's going to be rolling, and an artist is fine for that job. So we're going to go down to the next layer and paint trim areas. And let's go with light trim. And the thing is that their trim color is being applied to a lot of items that aren't just trim. So let's add up all of those. And instead of having these two at primer consistency, we're going to go ahead and make them at straight house paint consistency. Because I'm going to use house paint for these. And this is 195.5 square feet. And this is gonna be mostly rolling because it's trim, or it's surfaces. So it's windows and fireplaces and things like that. So it's gonna be mostly rolling. And then our next one is gonna be all the stick lumber pieces of the trim. So for this, I'm going to go with linear square feet of trim. And I'm going to make that little note to myself so I know what's going on. And once again, this is going to be straight house paint. My calculations on this is on another 196 square feet. But this is going to take more effort than rolling. So we're going to go cutting in slash lining because this is a lot. It's going to be a little bit more detailed. You have to get into nook and crannies. We want to account for a little bit extra time when working on this. Our next one is going to be our masking walls, which are going to be the dark blue color. Whoops. It's going to be our dark blue color. And these are the masking walls that are behind the curved wall, leading to the back of the fireplace and on top of the platform. This is again going to be straight house paint. We have a total of 284 square feet. Just to emphasize that for you, the sides of these right here, we calculated blue side walls at 84 square feet. And these walls over here, we calculated at 200 square feet. So that's 284 square feet. So added that up. There we go. That's still going to be rolling. There's not a lot of detail in any of that, so we don't need to account for any more. I'm going to do a few more. We're going to account for the black surround on the floor. Rolling is fine. And the last one, we're going to do some detail and finishing. That is giving us 30 hours of labor and $267 in paint. And this is additional items. This is mostly so that you remember to include layout, cartooning, sizing, those types of things. You could obviously, the same as up here, this front area doesn't affect anything. You can move it as much as you want. So we're going to come in and I do need a little starch. The amount required in gallons is going to be 1 gallon of starch. So that's about $1. It's not a lot, but it does give me an opportunity to say that it's about 200 square feet and try and figure out how long it's going to take this to happen. So it is going to be a little bit more of a scumble wet blend type activity. And so I think that that is relatively accurate. And so that gives us a little bit more labor calculation and a little bit more money calculation. This contingency is then calculated on the added amount, and then the total becomes the total amount of those numbers added as the subtotals and the contingency. So this is the number that's pulled and reported to the front page for our labor and our materials. It's added up for all the pages that we have for the total, and then it is compared to our budgeted amount. So it lets you know that we still have about 414 hours and $900 left in our budget. And so we're doing really good right now. So let's go ahead and go to the floor. And this right here, I'm going to go ahead and fill out a couple of these steps of the process, and then I'll explain to you what I did. All right, so I went ahead and filled out some of these things. I am going to have to do priming of the floor and a black surround, which I already included on the other sheet. So I went ahead and just said 0. So although this reads as 0, I wanted to make sure I remembered that I included it on the other sheet. So I'm going to start with a base and a scumble, which is going to be the light trim color. And this is step 2. Step includes both the light and the dark gray, but mostly the light. Modeling on the first layer, so I'll include the square footage, and rolling is probably not quite accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and bump that up to scumbling, so it takes a little bit longer, and that makes sense. And then layout, which is going to include time to calculate, calculation time, which is minimal cost in supplies. So there isn't any supplies involved. I have some chalk down here, which is again minimal, but it is going to cost us in time. So this is going to be a very high detail item, and it's going to require the charge artist. Color blocking in with the gray using dark. It's going to be about half the square footage of the floor is where the dark gray will be painted. So we only need to include half the square footage for that, and it is going to be scumble rather than wet blend. We're also going to add veining, which again is going to be even less square footage, but is going to be a high detail job. And we could also do up here with this calculation of high detail, we could also do layout instead of high detail, which is a similar number. Depending on who is doing it. And shadow is going to be high detail, and sealer is going to be rolling. So it's not going to be very high detail, but it is going to be more square footage. And I added 2 hours for sampling. So I will say that one of the things you can do is that this is entirely up to you if you want to just add in some things. So especially down here, if I just want to say, okay, I think instead of calculating chalk, I just want you to add like $10 for miscellaneous items that I think I need to purchase to lay out and make this work. And I think we just need to add some time. So I'm going to add some square footage to this column, and I just want to add some time. Or I can just come in here and say, you know what, I think it's going to take 2 hours for the scenic artist and 2 hours for an intern, 2 hours for a journey person. Let's have 2. So we're going to go with 4 hours there, and then the charge is going to be 2 hours. So I can just add it. I can just put it in there, and that's going to be absolutely fine. It does mean that the formulas are gone, but you can always go to another process sheet and copy those formulas back in, and that's not really an issue. So Once you have those, all of your processes complete, you can flip back over your main page and you have the totals of labor and the totals of materials coming through, and you can see whether you have a surplus or a deficit in your budget on both time and labor. And that is how you can use the costing worksheet to help you cost a show.